I'm going to take you through this final paper checklist, final experimental report checklist. It's a tool that you are not required to use, but I think would really help you as you prepare for this final experimental report. Remember, this assignment is worth 350 points, so you want to do well on this final assignment because it will greatly impact your grade. Okay, let's get started. If you haven't already looked at the rubric for the final paper, please go through and do that as soon as possible. When you do that, you will notice there is a lot about APA citations, APA body, grammar and spelling, writing style, body of the paper, paper format. However, these sections are not very specific on the rubric. For example, body of the paper, worth 100 points, says demonstrates a thorough understanding. The paper includes an abstract, introduction, literature review, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, reference page, table, and figures. Each of the sections, it has a bold and center title. Content of each section is clear and easy to understand. That's it. That's all you've got. That's not a lot. So, this checklist is meant to help you earn those 100 points for your actual paper. Please pay attention to the writing style, the grammar, the APA body, all of those things. Please pay attention to those. But what I really want you to get out of this final experimental report is the content, despite what the rubric may say. So let's talk about this. This checklist that looks really long and is overwhelming, I understand that it seems like a billion cells, but it's only 78 cells. It seems excessive, but it basically goes through all of those previous rubrics that you've had for the lit review, for the research questions, for the methods, for the discussion and results section. It basically goes through those and picks out all of the things that you really need to have to make those strong sections. It also highlights things that students this semester and in previous semesters have had issues with. So here we go. Before you go through this checklist, here are some things you need to keep in mind. Also, I know that this final report says it has a 7 to 10 page limit. You only need 7 pages to successfully do this report. It is much harder to write less than more because you get no room for fluff, and you have to make sure that you have included all of the very important information. Please make sure that you do that. I highly recommend that you err on the side of less pages filled with fluff, because when you start to add in all that fluff, your point gets lost. So, for example, the introduction and literature review needs to be cut down to 2.5 to about 2.5 pages. I know that your lit review was 5 to 7 pages. We need to cut it down. Some of you included a lot of direct quotes. You need to paraphrase those if possible. You're going to go through and say, now that I've completed my report, I noticed that all of these sources right here are no longer relevant to my project because my results went in a completely different direction. That's okay. You don't have to include every single source that you originally included in your lit review in this final paper. You pick out the most relevant. You want to define your topic, you want to talk about current research, and you need to show why there is a gap and a need for your project in particular. So as you do that, you're going to start slashing things. That's okay. If your sources go down to 5 sources instead of 10, you want to cut this to 2.5 pages that concisely explains your topic and builds up to the research questions. These are just a few things that will help make that section great. So look through these. Then your research question comes at the end of your lit review introduction section. That whole thing is going to build to it. You are going to include your research question. Include it in bold. Include a transition sentence that introduces that research question or questions. Then include your question in bold. You might not typically include your question in bold in other research papers or even in scientific journal articles, but for the purpose of this paper, include it in bold. You do not want to be confused. You do not want anyone to be confused about what your research question is. Highlight that research question. Okay, then we're going to move on to the methods section. You'll see this is half a page to a page. You need to explain the sampling method you chose and the experimental design that you chose. You do not need to explain the other ones that you chose not to go with. For example, students really like to say, we didn't choose cluster sampling because, we didn't choose snowball sampling because. No, you don't need any of that extra information. You need to say, we chose, for example, a convenience sample because it was fast to collect data, it was inexpensive, and it was relatively low risk and easy for the researchers to do. That is why you chose it. If you provide proper justification for why you chose your research method, you don't have to talk about the other ones because you thoroughly explained, we chose this, this is why we chose it. Make sure that you justify who you sampled. Make sure you justify your sample. Why did you choose to sample women ages 40 through 50 who were on social media? Well, because a very large portion of American women engage in social media on a daily basis, so you could reach a lot of people quickly for low cost. Things like that. You need to explain how you developed your survey, why you made the choices that you did. Did you write all your own questions? Did you pull from other sources? Why did you make that choice? What themes were explored? What types of questions were explored? Did you decide to go all multiple choice, all true, false? Did you use scale questions? If so, why? Then you also need to talk about your data collection process. You chose to sample via social media. You chose to do an intercept survey on campus. Why did you make that choice? Then talk about the data analysis. This is very simple. We chose, or whatever you chose to do, it was analyzed using this software. The following themes were explored. This is going to be 1 to 2 sentences, but just showing that you thought that through. Then we're going to move on to the results section. This is 1.5 to 2 pages. This means that if you were one of those people that included a huge number of figures and tables in your previous report, you are going to need to cut that to the most relevant. Why? Because people get lost when you have all these pictures, whether they understand the pictures or not. It's just so much information. Kind of like this video is way too much information and your brains are, I know. Okay, so cut it down. If you can explain the results in the text, do that. If you're starting to get down into these little details where you're like 49% of people said this, 12% of people said this, and it's just starting to get so confusing, then use a graph. It's totally fine. But if it can be explained in the text, if you can explain it to your roommate, your spouse, your friend, anyone, if you can explain it in words and they don't need a picture to understand what you're saying, then go with the words and not the picture. Pictures are good, but they take up a lot of room. And you only have so much room. Also remember that if you have 12 pictures, they start to look the same to people. They stop reading data labels. They stop reading titles. They just assume that you have inserted the same picture 700 times. Don't do that. Decide what needs to be included and what is okay without it. If you have 1,000,001 tables that you've created,
can you do coins?
And you do not, sorry about that, and you do not have room for them, you are welcome to include an appendix and just say, see Appendix A, and it will include all of those beautiful charts, tables, graphs, figures, everything you've created that was useful but maybe not essential to understanding. Please make sure that you do that. Please make sure that you introduce your respondents. Without it, and I'm just telling you, 76% of people said this, like, cool. I don't really know what that means. So you must introduce your study participants using basic demographic information at the start of the results section. Also remember, the results section is the only opportunity you have to introduce new information. This is where you get to answer your research question. You're going to lay out all the information and explain what it means in the discussion section. No new information can be introduced in the discussion section. So you've introduced all of that information. The discussion section is your so what. This is what you need to include. Your research findings are discussed within the context of previous research. By previous research, I mean within the context of your lit review. You are going to refer back and cite the same sources discussed in your lit review. This section will include citations. It will. If you would like full credit, it will. The implications or the so what of the results is provided. So instead of just saying 50% of people said this, now you're going to say, as mentioned, 50% of respondents said this. This implies what? What does it imply? How does that finding relate to previous research? Great. You're also going to include transition sentences. You're going to talk about the study strengths. This is one paragraph, and by one paragraph, I mean it's probably 2 to 3 sentences. Same with study weaknesses. Your sample size was low. You used a convenient sample, things like that. One paragraph, just a couple of sentences. And then your recommendations for future research. This is going to be your conclusion. You're wrapping it all up into a neat little Christmas present. And moving forward, you recommend that future researchers decide to do what with this? This is one paragraph, maybe 5 sentences. Just send your report out into the sunset. Then here's some general things that you should also be aware of. But wait, there's more. Don't worry, there's not more you need to do as you go through this. And I highly recommend you do. You should fill in yes, no, yes, no, you've done these things. Go through it today. Have I done this? Have I not? And you will see it changes colors as you go down. So you can go through and say, no, my writing was not logically organized. No, I did not properly cite my direct quotes. Okay, then you can go and refer back to this in the next few days and say, this was my problem area. I need to focus and fix this before I turn it in. The same is true with the yeses. This is just to kind of help keep you focused, keep you on track. These are the things that I have left to do. This is what I've already done. I know this paper seems overwhelming, especially when you see it's 350 points and it says 7 to 10 pages. Throw that 7 to 10 pages out of your head. That's ridiculous. This paper needs to be 6 to 7 pages. Cap it at 7. You can do it. I know. And then go through this checklist. It's likely that, like I said, 90 to 95% of this stuff is done, but you just need to make sure, yep, I've done that. No, I haven't. Look at this too. Have you reviewed and incorporated all instructor feedback? Have you reviewed and incorporated all peer feedback? If not, please go ahead and do that. I know your peer feedback is being submitted tomorrow, but this is just to help you for the next week. So good luck. I know you can do it. I am excited to read your reports. I'm excited to read them. And let me know if you have any questions.